From a map, it's just 34 kilometers of open water separating France from Britain. But for centuries, that narrow strait has swallowed entire armies and shattered invasion dreams, defended by tides surging at 5 knots and cliffs rising 110 meters above crashing surf. The illusion of an easy crossing hides a fortress built not just of stone, but of moving water, relentless weather, and relentless surveillance. If conquering Great Britain really is impossible, then what makes the island so untouchable even now? The answer starts with the secrets of the Channel, and not one invader yet has cracked them. A glance at the Dover Strait on a map makes the Channel look almost trivial. 34 kilometers, about the same as a suburban commute or a morning's run for a marathoner. But in military terms, that short stretch is a gulf. A single ferry or speedboat can cross it in under an hour, but moving an army is not the same as moving a single vessel. The illusion of simplicity collapses the moment you scale up from one ship to hundreds, from a handful of people to tens of thousands, each with vehicles, weapons, food and ammunition. The gulf is literal and practical, not just visual. A modern army corps, for example 30,000 troops, needs dozens of large ships or hundreds of barges, each forming up in tight columns. That is not just a line of boats, it is a floating city that must keep formation for hours, exposed and slow. Even in calm weather, it takes 3 to 6 hours for landing craft to cross the channel, and that is before factoring in the unpredictable. One ship veers off course, and the entire formation risks chaos. Unlike a bridge or a tunnel, the sea offers no fixed path. There are no road signs, no guardrails, and no second chances if a convoy drifts or scatters. Coordinating a mass crossing means managing hundreds of vessels, each with its own crew, all trying to stay in line, all vulnerable to the smallest navigational error. On paper, 34 kilometers is a short hop. In reality, it is a logistical gauntlet that has broken the plans of every would-be conqueror who underestimated what it takes to move not just men, but an entire war machine across open water. Twice each day, the waters between Dover and Calais surge and retreat with a force that can scatter even the most disciplined fleet. In the Dover Strait, spring tides push currents close to 5 knots, about as fast as a quick jogger, and relentless. These currents do not just flow in one direction. Every 6 hours the tide reverses, flipping the entire channel's movement like a switch. For any group of ships, this means constant correction, endless calculation, and no margin for error. And a landing force planning to cross must hit a moving target. Drift is not a minor nuisance. It's a threat that can push vessels miles off course in a matter of hours. A 5-knot current acting over a 6-hour crossing and can displace a ship 30 kilometers from its intended path, almost the entire width of the channel itself. Now, multiply that by hundreds of vessels, each with its own crew trying to keep formation in darkness or fog, often without clear sightlines or reliable communication. Timing becomes everything. The safest window to land, when the tide is slack and currents pause, lasts just 2 to 4 hours out of every 25. These moments are predictable, and defenders know them as well as attackers do. Miss the window and the fleet risks being swept past the landing beaches or scattered along the coast. Arrive too early or too late and the current can turn a coordinated assault into chaos, with the landing craft washing up in the wrong place or missing the shore entirely. The channel is not a moat that sits still. It moves twice a day with a force that can break the best laid invasion plans before a single shot is fired. For centuries, tides and currents have served as silent defenders, shaping every crossing attempt into a race against time and the sea itself. Every ship that moves through the Dover Strait is tracked, logged, and watched in real time. The Port of Dover's vessel traffic services operates around the clock using radar and AIS transponders to monitor hundreds of vessels each day. Each commercial ship, ferry, and fishing boat broadcasts its identity and position, creating a live map of movement so dense it looks almost solid. In this corridor, even a single vessel out of place is noticed within minutes. An invasion fleet, hundreds of ships, many without standard identification, would stand out immediately. There is no way to blend in, no chance to slip by unnoticed. The Channel is not just a body of water, it is a corridor under constant surveillance where surprise is impossible. Once across, attackers face another wall. The White Cliffs at Dover rise abruptly from the sea, reaching heights of 110 meters and stretching for 13 kilometers along the coast. These cliffs are nearly vertical, with only a handful of narrow gaps and beaches. For an invading force, this geography acts like a funnel. Landing craft cannot scale the cliffs, so every assault must squeeze through a few predictable openings. Defenders know exactly where to wait. During wartime, these choke points are fortified with obstacles, guns, and troops, all ready to pour fire onto anything that tries to land. The cliffs not only block access, they also compress the scale of an invasion. A massive army, after braving the sea and evading detection, finds itself forced into a handful of exposed corridors under the guns of defenders positioned above. The combination of relentless surveillance and the physical barrier of the cliffs means any landing is both seen and contained before it even begins. Britain's southern coast is not just protected by water, but by a wall. So a wall of a chalk and a web of eyes, turning the dream of a surprise attack into a logistical nightmare. In 1588, King Philip II of Spain sent more than 130 ships and around 30,000 men toward England, hoping to break the island's defenses with the largest fleet Europe had ever seen. Command fell to the Duke of Medina Sidonia, a nobleman with little naval experience who inherited a complex plan. The plan was to fight through English warships, link up with Spanish troops in the Netherlands, and then land an invasion force on English soil. The Armada advanced into the English Channel, and it was soon battered by English fireships, while ships began running low on ammunition as days dragged on. It was not English cannon that alone sealed the fleet's fate. As the battered Spanish ships tried to regroup, fierce Atlantic storms swept in from the west. Winds drove the fleet north, away from the Channel and any hope of landing. Medina Sidonia's only option was to circle the British Isles, steering his fleet around Scotland and down past Ireland to reach home. The decision proved disastrous. In the wild waters off the Irish and Scottish coasts, the Armada broke apart. Spanish galleons built for the calmer Mediterranean foundered on rocks and shoals. More than 20 ships were wrecked along these shores. Thousands of sailors and soldiers drowned or died of exposure. Survivors staggered ashore only to face hostile locals and starvation. Medina Sidonia, writing to King Philip II, described men dying of hunger and exhaustion, supply barrels empty, and crews unable to hold their course against relentless weather. The English Channel had held, but it was the Atlantic storms and the rugged northern coastline that finished the job, scattering the greatest fleet of its age before a single Spanish soldier could set foot in England. Napoleon Bonaparte stood on the northern coast of France with a vision as grand as any in European history. At Boulogne-sur-Mer, he assembled an army of 150,000 men backed by hundreds of flat-bottomed barges and gunboats, all intended for one purpose: to carry his army of England across the Channel and into the heart of Britain. The shoreline transformed into a military city, tents, artillery, and men drilling in endless rows, while shipyards churned out invasion craft day and night. But the real obstacle was not the distance. Napoleon understood that the Channel was a battlefield in itself. His plan relied on a fleeting window, just enough time to move his massive force across before the Royal Navy could intervene. For that, he needed control of the sea. The French and Spanish fleets were meant to draw the Royal Navy away, but on paper the numbers never balanced. The Royal Navy maintained around 120 ships of the line, outmatching the Franco-Spanish fleet, which could muster barely half that. Even a temporary victory at sea looked unlikely. The barges themselves were slow, vulnerable, and often crewed by men with little experience. A single British frigate could scatter or sink dozens of these flat-bottomed transports. Napoleon's military genius could not compensate for the hard limits of maritime logistics. Supplying 150,000 men across contested water required more than just ships. It demanded uninterrupted control of the Channel, something France never achieved. In 1805, after the Royal Navy's victory at Trafalgar, the invasion was abandoned. Boulogne's army never set sail, The Channel held the line not by sheer distance, but by making sea control the price of entry. No foreign army has conquered all of Great Britain since William of Normandy claimed the English throne in 1066. That year, after defeating King Harold at Hastings, William's forces moved quickly to seize control of London and the heart of the kingdom. The result was more than a change of ruler. It was the complete subjugation of England, new laws, new rulers, and a new language of power imposed from the top down. The Norman conquest stands alone as the last time an outside force overcame both the military and political will of the entire nation. Other foreign landings have happened, but none have matched the scale or outcome of 1066. In 1688, William of Orange arrived with Dutch troops, but the Glorious Revolution was less a conquest than a political takeover. English nobles invited William to intervene, and much of the army and navy switched sides before a shot was fired. The regime changed, but the country was never subdued by force of arms. This is the distinction that matters. Conquest means more than landing troops or changing a government. It means breaking resistance, occupying territory, and forcing a nation to accept new rulers against its will. Since the Normans, every attempt to repeat that feat by Spain, by Napoleon, by Germany has failed to cross that line. The claim is not that Britain has never faced invasion threats or foreign armies on its soil, but that no one has managed to conquer, occupy, and remake the country as the Normans did. For nearly 1,000 years, the fortress has held. In the summer of 1940, the German High Command drafted plans for Operation Sea Lion, a full-scale invasion of Britain. The plan depended on a chain of victories that never arrived. First, the Luftwaffe needed to sweep the Royal Air Force from the skies and secure air superiority over the English Channel. Day after day, German bombers and fighters clashed with British Spitfires and Hurricanes. The Royal Air Force held on, using radar and rapid response tactics to blunt the attacks. By September, German losses were mounting, and Fighter Command remained in operation. AIR, meanwhile, the German Navy faced its own crisis. Admiral Erich Raeder, head of the Kriegsmarine, warned that his fleet was too depleted to shield invasion barges from the Royal Navy. Most available vessels were converted river barges, slow, unarmored, and vulnerable to even a single destroyer. The Royal Navy, still strong after Dunkirk, could reach the Channel in hours and devastate any crossing attempt. Raeder argued that without total control of the skies, the Channel would become a killing ground. Despite mounting doubts, preparations continued. Barges and troops gathered in French ports, but the window was closing. On September the 17th, 1940, Hitler postponed Operation Sea Lion indefinitely. The combination of British air resistance and naval power had made the crossing too dangerous to attempt. The invasion that threatened Britain's survival never left the docks. The fortress had held not through walls, but through control of AIR and sea. On June the 6th, 1944, the Allies launched Operation Overlord. In a single day, they sent 156,115 troops across the English Channel. This was not a gamble on luck or a test of minimal force. It was a demonstration of what it truly takes to breach the fortress. The invasion force relied on nearly 7,000 ships and landing craft, from battleships to tiny assault boats, as all coordinated to hit 5 separate beaches along an 80-kilometer stretch of the Normandy coast. Overhead, more than 11,000 aircraft flew missions to protect the fleet, disrupt German reinforcements, and support troops on the ground. The logistics behind this operation dwarfed anything attempted before. Supplies flowed in an unbroken chain, ammunition, fuel, food, and vehicles unloaded around the clock. Engineers assembled 2 artificial harbors called Mulberry Ports, towed across the Channel and anchored off the beaches, allowing the Allies to offload thousands of tons of cargo each day, even before a single French port was captured. The cost was staggering. There were about 10,000 Allied casualties on the first day alone, hundreds of ships damaged or lost, and a supply effort so vast it required months of planning and stockpiling. D-Day proved that crossing the Channel and landing an army is possible, but only if an attacker is willing to pay an almost unimaginable price in resources, coordination, and human life. Anything less falls short. North of the lowlands, the landscape turns against any invader. Scotland's highlands rise in a jagged line, crowned by Ben Nevis at 1,345 metres, the highest point in the British Isles. The western slopes catch Atlantic storms and drench some valleys with more than 4,000 millimetres of rain each year. Roads vanish into mist and rivers swell overnight, turning tracks into mud and bridges into bottlenecks. For centuries, these mountains and glens were more than scenery. They were obstacles that broke armies and slowed supply columns to a crawl. After the Jacobite uprisings of the early 18th century, the British government sent General George Wade to solve the problem of Highland resistance. Between 1725 and 1737, Wade oversaw the construction of over 240 miles of military roads and dozens of stone bridges, carving new routes through the wildest terrain in Britain. His roads allowed redcoats to march from garrison to garrison, but the land itself never lost its power to isolate and defend. Today, Scotland's role as a fortress remains. Royal Air Force Lossiemouth on the northeast coast stands ready with Typhoon jets and P-8 Poseidon patrol aircraft. Faslane on the Clyde shelters the Royal Navy's ballistic missile submarines. The core of the UK's nuclear deterrent. These bases anchor the northern defence, projecting power into the North Atlantic and guarding the routes that run through the GI-UK gap. For any attacker, pushing north means facing not just the weather and the mountains, but a modern shield of air and sea power. Each step inland only multiplies the cost of conquest. No superpower has solved the equation of weather and supply that guards Britain's shores. In an era of satellites, submarines, and rapid deployment, the old fortress logic still shapes defence strategy. Scotland's bases and the Channel's currents remain critical in NATO calculations. A nation built on islands knows security is not luck, it is layers, and those layers still hold. Thanks for watching. Share your thoughts on what fortress means today.